Have you ever loved someone so much that you missed the signs? Have you ever given your heart completely to someone who deep down perhaps never deserved it? Sometimes love is so intense, so blind, that we mistake small warnings for mental exaggerations and silence what our intuition screams just to keep what we believe to be true. And that's exactly what happened to me. A story I've never told in its entirety to anyone, but today I feel it needs to be told, not out of anger, nor out of revenge, but because there are truths that liberate, and mine has weighed too heavily on my chest. He seemed perfect, attentive, caring, the kind who remembers the color of your favorite shirt and makes coffee just the way you like it. He was the kind of man every woman back then thought she'd hit the jackpot, and I, like so many others, believed it. I really did. We look in the mirror with that sparkle in our eyes, thinking we found someone to share our lives with, to grow old with. But while I was dreaming, he was already charting other paths that didn't include loyalty or respect. Only at the time, I didn't know it yet. And maybe, even if I had, I wasn't ready to see it. Because betrayal doesn't begin with a hidden kiss or a body outside the house. It begins with small absences, prolonged silences, empty stares. It begins with that feeling we can't explain, but that tightens our chest and leaves a bitter taste in our words. Have you ever been there? Of feeling something's wrong, but unable to pinpoint what exactly? Of swallowing your doubts, pretending everything's fine, and smiling even when your heart is slowly breaking? I remember one night in particular. We'd had dinner, the conversation was lukewarm, and he seemed distant, his mind elsewhere. When he went to sleep, he left the phone face down, and for some reason that hurt me more than any scream. It sounds silly, I know, but sometimes the smallest detail reveals the cruelest truth, and what you're about to discover now may surprise you, because I didn't make a fuss. I didn't cry in front of him. I just began to observe, quietly, like someone who knows reality is about to rear its ugly head. For days, maybe weeks, I pieced together the pieces. Little lies, confusing schedules, different smells, and that look that no longer sought me out like it used to. And yet, even with everything telling me something's wrong, I was still there, delivering love, making food, trying to keep the house in order. Because we cling to the idea that there's still time to save it, that it's just a phase, that if we try a little harder, it will go back to how it was. But what no one talks about is that often what we try to save no longer exists. And I'm not just talking about infidelity. No, I'm talking about emotional abandonment, that silence that becomes routine, the indifference that screams louder than any argument, that betrayal that isn't physical, but hurts just as much or even more. The kind of betrayal that makes you question your own worth, that shatters your self-esteem, that makes you wake up in the middle of the night with a tight chest and your heart whispering, "Could it be me who's the problem?" I needed time, a lot of time, because when it finally sunk in, I had already lost a bit of myself. And perhaps that's what hurts the most, realizing that while you loved someone, the other person had already given up long ago. They just forgot to tell you. The pain of that discovery wasn't greater than the pain of keeping quiet for so long. And that's why today, even with trembling hands and a racing heart, I decided to tell this story. Because someone on the other side of the screen might be going through the same thing and thinking they're alone. And they're not. Stay with me, because what happened after that, I never told anyone. And you might be surprised by how I reacted. Not the way you expected, not with a scandal, but with something much stronger. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. And you know, as I say all this now, after so many years of swallowing in silence, a lump forms in my throat, not of sadness, but of relief, because speaking, even if belatedly, is also a way of healing. It's as if, by sharing my story, I'm giving back a voice to that woman who once kept quiet for fear of appearing weak. And maybe you, on the other side of the screen, are feeling something similar. Maybe you've experienced something you've never told anyone, or maybe you're carrying a doubt, a regret, a weight on your chest that no longer deserves this space. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most, or share something you feel deeply about. I read everything with great respect because it's through this sincere exchange that we build a space of truth, empathy, and support. Your participation is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content, real, unvarnished stories that show that no one is alone in this world. And if you feel like you want to continue listening to these voices that, like mine, were once silenced, then like this video and subscribe to the channel. This helps me keep this space alive, welcoming, and filled with even more stories that deserve to be heard. Now, take a deep breath with me. Because what happened after that, when I decided to get even, was something that still makes me smile silently to this day. At first, he seemed like the sweetest man in the world, and perhaps that was what confused me most later, because no one expects poison to come wrapped in a flower. He listened to me attentively, made beautiful promises, and looked at me as if I were the only woman in the world. Those small kindnesses, the notes, the affectionate gestures, it was all part of a scenario that seemed to have come straight out of one of those novels we read in secret at night, by the light of a lamp. I remember thinking that, after so much life, I had finally found peace. And that's where the most dangerous trap lies, when love seems too perfect to arouse suspicion. We made plans for everything: weekends at the beach, a little garden in the backyard, a dog for company. Simple things, but for me, they sounded like a promise of stability. And when you've been through so much, as I have, you cling to those promises with all your might. Because it seems that finally, life has decided to be kind. I wasn't naive, but I was hopeful. And that sometimes can be confusing. The heart of someone who has loved deeply continues to search for a safe place to rest, and mine found it in him, or at least thought it had. It was as if everything had been designed to make me lower my guard. He knew my old pains, the scars that don't show in photos, and he used this with a frightening delicacy, like someone tending to a cracked vase just to make sure it doesn't break prematurely. I trusted him, not because I was foolish, but because he proved himself trustworthy, and that's one of the hardest truths to swallow, when deception comes with a smile and a caress. The mindset I carried back then was that of a woman who believed in second chances. I thought that perhaps happiness was indeed possible after so many setbacks, that all it took was making the right choices. But not every right choice depends solely on us. Sometimes you choose someone based on the version of yourself they portray, and that version is carefully constructed. There's no way to guess the hidden truth behind the sweet words, the lingering hugs, the coffee in bed. It was a constructed narrative, and I was just another chapter, written slowly, to be torn out without warning. It's funny, or tragic, how details take on new meaning later. A quick glance at a phone, an unexplained disappearance that, at the time, seemed like just fatigue. A change in tone, nothing major, nothing obvious. But it's in these silent scenes that the lie begins to take hold, and even when instinct screams, we remain silent, because the fear of losing what seems good speaks louder. And we learn to ignore the discomfort until it becomes impossible to ignore. I remember one time he arrived later than usual. He said he had a flat tire, but he wouldn't look me in the eye. He gave me a quick, almost mechanical kiss, and went to take a shower with his phone in his hand. That sparked something inside me. It wasn't jealousy. It was something deeper, an intuition that beats in my chest like a drum. But I still didn't want to accept it, because accepting it would mean facing head-on the possibility of being betrayed. And that, for someone who trusted me so much, hurts more than the fact itself. The truth is that when you truly love, you tend to rationalize everything, to justify what has no justification, trying to understand what, deep down, is simply unfair. My transformation began at this point, when I realized that naivete wasn't a flaw of mine, but proof of my commitment, and that the betrayal said nothing about my worth, but everything about his character. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what came after this discovery wasn't a scream or a scandal. It was strategic silence, a deliberate decision, an unexpected turnaround, and perhaps even sweet in the way I chose to retaliate. Comment there. That makes sense to me. It was in the look, or the lack thereof. It began like that, without fanfare, without any major scandals, but with a silence that said more than any words, a kind of distance not measured in meters, but in attention. And attention, when you love, is worth its weight in gold. His eyes, once so present, seemed to look right through me, as if I were a scene he was already too familiar with and no longer wanted to truly see. And that's when something inside me began to grow restless. Because love can accept a lot, but indifference doesn't go unnoticed. I noticed conversations became shorter, laughter became rarer, and "I'm tired" began to replace "I missed you." It was all subtle, things that, to an outsider, would seem normal in the hustle and bustle of everyday life. But anyone in a real relationship knows there are gestures that change tone, there are silences that weigh heavily. And it was in these details that I began to see the crack he was trying to hide. His routine began to transform into something I could no longer follow. Meetings that never ended, friendships that never had a name, commitments that popped up at the last minute. All of this wrapped up in well-rehearsed explanations. And no matter how much he said it was just a phase, that work was hectic, that it was all in my head. My heart told me otherwise. And the heart, oh, it warns. Even when we don't want to listen. That's when the most profound shift in my mindset began. I stopped looking for answers in his words and started paying attention to the behind-the-scenes aspects of the relationship. I began observing what he did when he thought I wasn't looking, the way he hid his phone as if protecting a secret, the smile he gave when a notification arrived, the rush to get away when he needed to answer a call, and most of all, the absence. He was there, but not there, present in body, but distant in soul. And me? I pretended not to see. For a while, I accepted this lukewarm version of what was once love, because sometimes it's easier to deceive yourself than to face the pain of someone who's slowly being left behind. And this is a truth many people don't have the courage to say. Some betrayals begin long before bed. It begins when the other person chooses to hide their heart, when they stop choosing you every day, when they treat you like a piece of land. But I'm not a landscape. I never was. And it was this thought that gave me the strength to face what was before me. That's when I realized it wasn't about jealousy, insecurity, or paranoia. It was about respect, about truth, about realizing I deserved more than emotional crumbs. Because those who truly love you don't make you feel wrong for realizing what's wrong. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened after those first signs was what truly changed the course of everything. And that's where the story takes a different path, one few would have expected from me. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. There are things we feel before we see. It's as if the body knows before the mind, as if the heart says everything silently. That unprovoked shiver, that unease that comes from nowhere, that doubt that sets in even when everything seems calm on the outside. I had no proof, no messages, no catches, no confessions, but I had a knot in my stomach. And when we've lived long enough, we learn. It's better to trust that knot than to lose ourselves trying to untie it. My intuition began to manifest itself in the simplest details. It was a change in the smell of his clothes, a different scent in the air. It was the way he left the house, overdressed for a normal engagement, the way he avoided certain topics, the way he placed his phone face down, something he'd never done before. And every time I asked, he answered too patiently, as if he'd already rehearsed everything. Those who hold the truth in their hearts don't need a script, but those who lie memorize the character. The strangest thing is that, even without concrete proof, I already knew. Deep down, a woman always knows. It's not just intuition. It's wisdom. It's accumulated experience. It's this skill we develop after so much observation of the world around us. And perhaps that's why so many people doubt what we feel. Because it's not logical, it's not visible, it's not tangible, but it's accurate. I started paying attention to the tone of his voice. It had a forced sweetness, a disconnected care, a concern that didn't match the real absence I felt. It was as if he were trying to maintain a facade while the castle was already crumbling inside. And at this stage, I wasn't confronting it yet. I just felt, and observed, and prepared. Because when the truth doesn't come to you, you have to have the courage to go after it. But I wanted more than to know. I wanted to understand why. What drives someone to lie to the person they've always been by? What weighs more, the desire for happiness at any cost or the fear of destroying what already exists? And the biggest question, why is betrayal so often hidden until it can no longer be? It was at this point that my mindset began to shift. I stopped being the woman who suffered in silence and became the one who wants to understand the behind the scenes of her life, because every decision has a reason and every choice carries a hidden truth. And it was by seeking these truths that I discovered much more about myself than about him. I discovered, for example, that I had been denying myself for a long time, that my presence in the relationship had become routine, not enchantment, that my listening had become an echo, that my embrace was accepted, but no longer desired. And this hurts more than any physical betrayal, because when love becomes sick, it becomes an obligation, and no one deserves to live in a relationship where only one person tries to keep everything together. It was then that I understood. Intuition is a gift, a warning, an internal alarm that sounds when things are out of whack, and if we silence this warning, life will exact its toll later, and exact its toll dearly. So I stopped trying to silence this voice within me. Instead, I decided to listen more attentively, with more courage, with more intention, because it is by listening to what's inside that we begin to free ourselves from what holds us back from the outside. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what I discovered next and how I reacted was what really changed the whole story. Right there, my intuition protects me. When I saw that message, the world stopped, literally. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a scene, it was silence. A silence that screams from within, that freezes the body and at the same time makes the blood boil. I was poking around in something I shouldn't have, it's true, but those who love and distrust end up finding what they didn't even want to see. And there it was, a short text, almost innocent to those who don't experience the context. But I understood every comma. Every word carried the intention of someone who knows they're treading on forbidden territory. It wasn't just the content of the message, it was the form, the affection disguised as friendship, the time it was sent, the way her name was saved in his phone. Poor disguises. This wasn't the first time. This was common. The truth, however small, carries enormous weight when it fits exactly where we've always felt doubt. In that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even seek satisfaction. I simply looked within, and I felt as if something inside me had broken. But at the same time, something began to align. It was as if that revelation, painful as it was freeing a part of me that had long been chained to illusion. And the penny dropped. Love, when it's true, leaves us with no doubt. When you need to question yourself constantly, you already have your answer. There, holding that phone in my hand, my heart racing and my hands cold, I had to decide who I wanted to be in the face of the truth. Because there are people who find out and pretend they didn't see it, who choose to stay out of fear of loneliness, shame, and starting over. But in that moment, my mindset began to shift. I realized it wasn't about him. It was about me, about how willing I was to put myself first, about how ready I was to step out of the role of the waiter and into the role of the doer. That message wasn't just the end of a love story. It was the beginning of an internal process of transformation. I began to see the impact that relationship had already had on my self-esteem, my decisions, and the way I saw myself. Because when we live under suspicion, we shrink without realizing it. And when you shrink for too long, you end up forgetting your own size. It's strange to say, but that betrayal had a revelatory effect, not just on him, but on me. I began to remember all the times I'd suspected him, and he'd made me doubt myself. Every lame excuse I'd accepted to avoid conflict, the fake smiles at family gatherings, the empty Sundays when he'd said he was tired, and I'd believed him. Because when we love, we justify the unjustifiable. But after seeing that message, the love that held me captive became something else. It became reflection. It became impulse. And above all, it became strength. Because behind pain, there is always an invitation to change, a chance to regain dignity. And I knew what I would do from then on was my choice. It no longer depended on his actions. It depended only on my courage to turn the key. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what came after this discovery, the way I got back at him without him ever suspecting, is the part that truly transformed everything. Comment there? I've already felt that shock. I didn't cry in front of anyone. And it wasn't because it didn't hurt. It was because it hurt so much that even crying seemed like a small thing. The pain came silently, discreetly, settling into every corner of my chest like someone who knows the house well. And even surrounded by people, I felt alone, not for lack of company, but for lack of space for this pain to exist aloud, because there are certain feelings we don't know where to put them. Neither inside nor outside, I remained silent, not out of cowardice, but out of protection, because telling the story meant reliving it, and reliving it at that moment was too much. I remember sitting at the table, smiling at guests, answering the phone, washing dishes, as if nothing had happened. But inside me, it was as if a glass had shattered, and the shards were scattered everywhere. Every thought, every memory, every gesture of his after that day, everything hurt. Everything felt contaminated. And then comes the hardest part, pretending everything's fine when in fact it isn't. Continuing with your routine as if the world hadn't turned upside down, keeping appointments, feeding the kids, going to the grocery store, smiling politely at your neighbor. On the outside, everything looks the same. On the inside, it's a war, a silent battle between what you feel and what you need to show. And this dissonance, this chasm between what you live inside and what you express on the outside, undermines us. There's also the fear of judgment, because talking about betrayal is almost like assuming guilt, as if the other person's mistake exposed a flaw in yourself. And, as absurd as it may seem, it weighs heavily. We ask ourselves, was I too blind? Did I fail to see what was right in front of me? And these questions, asked silently, hurt more than any external accusation. I remember one particular night, lying in bed, my back to him, my eyes wide open in the darkness. The sound of his breathing seemed strange, almost irritating, and at the same time, there was a part of me that still searched for an answer, some explanation, something that would make that hole inside me stop growing. But nothing came, no explanation, no comfort. Just the realization that what we had experienced up until that point was no longer what it seemed. And that's when I began to realize the weight of silence, how much it hurts. Because keeping everything to ourselves is also a form of violence. And even when we choose to remain silent, this silence doesn't protect, it imprisons. I smiled on the outside and bled on the inside, and no one noticed, because I've always been the strong woman, the one who handles everything, the one who resolves, the one who welcomes, the one who endures. But no one ever asked if I wanted to continue being strong, if I needed it, if it still served me. And amidst all this internal chaos, I began to observe myself more, to notice my reactions, my thoughts, to notice how much I was changing without even realizing it. Pain shapes us in a silent but profound way, and even without words, I felt something inside me saying, "This isn't where you deserve to be. This isn't what you deserve to carry." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it was from this forced silence that a new force began to emerge, and once it surfaced, there was no turning back. Comment there. That makes sense to me. It was in the midst of all that silence that the plan began to emerge, not as a scream of rage, not as a desperate surge of revenge, but as an internal response, almost serene, a gesture considered, studied, shaped with the same calm he thought I would never possess. Because what I felt in that moment was no longer hatred. It was clarity. It was as if I had stepped outside myself, looked at everything from the outside, and understood that what I needed was not to destroy, but to rebuild myself the right way. It wasn't easy to contain the urge to confront, to lay everything on the table, to demand an explanation I knew would never come fully. But at the same time, there was a kind of freedom in knowing he had no idea what was going on inside me. And it was in this space that the transformation began to happen. I understood that I could make impactful decisions without having to raise my voice. The hidden truth was there, in the way he smiled, thinking nothing had changed, and I let him. Because sometimes letting someone else believe they're still in control is the most silent and effective way to reclaim your own power. While he continued with his well-rehearsed disguises and lies, I was behind the scenes of our story, rewriting everything. Each step I took seemed small, but it was part of something much bigger. It was like putting together an emotional puzzle, a real mindset process, looking at the pain and asking, "What do you want to teach me with this?" And then slowly, I began to draw up my own plan, a plan that didn't involve yelling or fussing. It was something more intimate, more pointed. It was about emotional justice, about returning pain with dignity, with intelligence, and with a kind of strength he never knew I possessed. I began to observe everything more closely, his schedules, his patterns, his oversights, not with desperation, but with purpose. Every detail fueled what I was building. And it wasn't just a plan to get even. It was, in fact, a profound movement of reconnection with myself. I wanted to see myself strong, clear-headed, capable of making informed decisions, even in the face of betrayal. And that gave me a power he could never steal. The idea came to me on an ordinary evening. He'd arrived late, as usual, and I, sitting in the living room with a book on my lap, looked at him with a neutrality that disconcerted him. It was at that moment that I understood. I had won, because the pain no longer paralyzed me. I was no longer trapped by what he did. And that's when I thought, I'm going to come out of this with my head held high, but not before leaving my mark, not as punishment, but as a subtle reminder that he would never step on anyone the same way again. And the most surprising thing was realizing that, contrary to what many people think, this emotional justice didn't require major actions. Sometimes it was a strange silence. Other times it was an unexpected kindness that left him disconcerted. Small mirrors that I held up in front of him without saying a word, and little by little he began to lose himself in his own insecurity. Because nothing scares someone manipulative more than realizing they no longer have control of the narrative. The journey that began in the depths of pain now moved at a different pace, a pace I chose for myself. It was then that I understood the true impact of self-understanding. When you stop seeking answers outside yourself and start asking new questions within, and with them come revelations about who you were, about who you stopped being, and most importantly, about who you can still become after all this. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic because the next step in this story wasn't just surprising, it was transformative. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. He thought he was still playing. He thought the board was his, that I was just a tired, predictable piece, trapped in the pain he himself caused. The funny thing is, while he slept peacefully next to his own lie, I was there, awake, but no longer suffering, but understanding. Understanding how certain lessons don't need to be shouted. They are taught in silence. And that's exactly how the payback happened. Without fanfare, without an audience, but with an impact he couldn't explain, even if he tried. It wasn't about making him suffer. It was about showing him that he was already losing and didn't even realize it. Because losing someone who knows your worth is a silent but devastating fall. Every time he walked into the house and saw me more serene, more confident, more whole, something in him began to crumble, and he didn't understand why. It bothered him, because what fueled his power was my pain. And now that I no longer reacted as I used to, he began to feel useless, small, invisible within his own game. The truth is, I didn't need to say anything. My silence was the greatest mirror, and in that reflection, he saw himself alone. That's when he began to realize, little by little, that something had changed. I no longer asked where he was going, nor demanded attention. I no longer cried in corners, nor reacted to his absences. Because now he was the one waiting for reactions that never came, and this was shattering his logic. What was once control became doubt. What was once certainty became insecurity, a discomfort that grew inside, and he didn't know where it came from. But I knew, and that was enough for me, because the payback in this case was emotional but not cruel. It was psychological but not manipulative. It was symbolic. I simply gave him back, silently, what he had given me. The feeling of being lost within something that had previously felt familiar. But while I transformed pain into self-knowledge, he transformed the lie itself into a prison. And the more I freed myself, the more he lost himself. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because he never expected me to be able to quietly turn the tables. There was a moment when he began observing me from afar, as if trying to decipher a new language. He searched my face for the emotions that had previously been exposed, but now were elsewhere, at peace. I smiled more. I cared for myself more zealously. I connected with people, with ideas, with places he had no idea existed in my life. And that for him was the beginning of the end, not of our relationship, but of the image he had built of me. because he lost not only the woman he once had, he also lost the control he thought he had. This was the true payback, teaching, with silent actions, that what is done carelessly will one day return as absence, that what is planted selfishly will one day blossom as distance. And the most beautiful thing is that I didn't have to erase anything of who I was. On the contrary, I reclaimed everything. Every part of me he tried to silence, I brought back, with firmness, with love, with respect, because that was the difference between us. He lied to survive in his own world. I healed myself to truly live in mine. It was through this process that I understood that emotional justice isn't about making the other person pay. It's about freeing yourself. And on this journey, those who choose the truth always win. Even if it seems harder at first, even if it hurts to take the first step, what comes next is liberating. Because those who learn to be self-sufficient never accept crumbs again. And the other person? Well, the other person will understand this little by little, because all emotional abandonment eventually returns, but not in the way they expect. It returns in the form of an absent presence, a voice that doesn't change, eyes that no longer seek explanations. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what happened after that was even more revealing. Comment there. That makes sense to me. That's when I realized it wasn't about him. It never was. The wound hurt, it's true, but the healing only began when I stopped waiting for him to acknowledge the damage he'd done. Because some pains aren't healed by apologies, but by silent decisions we make internally. The decision to no longer carry guilt that isn't ours. The decision to stop looking at ourselves through the eyes of the one who betrayed us. The decision to finally choose ourselves. It was at this point that my transformation began. And look, there was no magic formula, no motivational social media phrase. There were swallowed tears. There was heavy silence. There were mornings when I looked in the mirror and no longer knew who that woman staring back at me was. But there was also a spark, a memory of what I once was before all that, of the lively, light, curious woman, full of dreams that he tried to diminish with the weight of neglect. Reclaiming my name was this, remembering who I was without the pain he left me with. It meant stopping defining myself by disappointment, because I realized that carrying betrayal as my identity was giving him more power than he deserved. So I gradually peeled away each layer of hurt that kept me from myself. I started within, with the way I spoke to myself, the way I treated myself, the way I saw myself. I changed the narrative. Instead of asking myself why he did it, I started asking myself why I was still stuck in it. It was hard, because there are times when we think that forgiving is freeing the other person from guilt. But in reality, it's just us freeing ourselves from the control of history. Forgiving, for me, was saying, I know what you did, but I won't let it define my future. And at that point, something beautiful began to happen. I began to breathe differently, to walk differently, to choose differently. I began to speak my mind without fear of alienating anyone, because those who are scared of our truth have never been. That's how I regained my peace. Not the artificial peace of someone who pretends to have forgotten, but real peace, the kind that comes when we stop fighting what we can't change, when we accept that what has been done cannot be undone, but can be transformed into a learning experience. And that doesn't mean I don't have bad days. There are days when memories return, when my heart aches, when the silence weighs heavily. But now, on those days, I know how to embrace myself, and that makes all the difference. My light, oh, that one took a while to return. Because betrayal doesn't just erase trust in the other person, it erases trust in ourselves. We begin to doubt our worth, our perception, our intuition. We begin to believe that perhaps we were weak, foolish, blind. But when I began to revisit my story with more affection and less judgment, I saw that the love I gave wasn't the mistake. The mistake was the one who didn't know how to receive it. And then, the guilt disappeared and the shine returned. This is what reclaiming your own light is all about. It's looking within and reconnecting with what was always there. It was just covered in pain. And it was in this reconnection that I finally felt free. Not because I'd overcome everything, but because I'd accepted that overcoming isn't destiny. It's a daily practice. It's a continuous choice to not let what hurt us dictate how we love ourselves from now on. And you know, after everything, I realized that the greatest revenge is being truly happy. And not because of it, but in spite of it. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what came after this reunion with myself was something that I didn't even expect to experience. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. For many years, this story lived silently within me. And it wasn't just any silence. It was dense, heavy, made of memories I swept under my chest like someone trying to hide a shard of glass under the rug, hoping it would stop cutting on its own. It didn't stop. It never stopped. And no matter how much time passed, no matter how much life went on, this wound had a cruel habit of flaring when I least expected it. In a conversation, in a song, in a scent. As if the past had a life of its own and insisted on reminding me, I'm still here. The truth is, I hid all this for so long because deep down, I was ashamed. Ashamed of having believed so much, of having given myself without reservation, of having loved someone who, in the end, trampled on what was most sacred to me, trust. And perhaps the cruelest part of betrayal isn't what the other person does, but what it does to us. Because suddenly you start questioning yourself constantly. Was I stupid? Did everyone see it and I didn't? Was it my fault? Keeping this secret was, for a long time, a form of self-protection, as if remaining silent were a way to maintain dignity, to hide scars, to appear strong even when everything was falling apart inside. But today I understand. It's not silence that protects us. It's the courage to transform what hurt into something that teaches, that liberates. And we can only do this when we decide to face our own story head-on, without filters, without fear of judgment. I'd never told anyone about this before. Never. Not even my best friend. Not even my daughters. Not even anyone. It was a pact I made with myself, way back when, in the heat of my grief. No one needs to know. And for a long time, I kept that pact with all the rigor in the world. Until one day, alone on a random afternoon, I found myself looking in the mirror and asking, but why not tell? Why keep it bottled up like a crime? Why turn a pain that's already passed into an eternal prison? And that's when the key turned. That's when I understood that sharing isn't weakness, it's liberation. That giving voice to what has marked us isn't reopening wounds, but allowing them to breathe and truly heal. The hidden truth only hurts as long as we insist on hiding it. Once we bring it to light, it loses its power to haunt us. Today, when I tell this story, I no longer tremble. My heart doesn't race like it used to. I no longer feel the lump in my throat that made me swallow words and tears at the same time. Because now, this story is mine, and I'm the one who decides what to do with it. And I chose to share it. Because if there's one thing I've learned throughout life, it's that often what we experience in the dark can be the light for someone still lost in their own silence. This story changed me. It forced me to reclaim parts of myself I'd forgotten. It made me understand the importance of listening, of presence, of acceptance, because pain, when it doesn't find space to exist, becomes an echo within the soul. And this echo tires and sickens. And that's why, today, I tell it. Not to point fingers, not to dramatize, but to free myself and anyone else carrying a similar burden. And if you've come this far hearing all this, know that it's no coincidence. Maybe something in this story touched a corner of your being that you'd forgotten about. And that's okay. This is how healing begins, when we allow ourselves to feel, when we understand that our pain doesn't define us, but can transform us. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is something that no one has ever known about this story, and perhaps that is what most reveals who I really am. Comment there. That makes sense to me. You know, today, I understand more clearly what was once just a jumbled pain inside my chest. We spend so much time trying to understand why someone who claimed to love us is capable of hurting us. And maybe the answer is too simple for someone with a shattered heart, because it wasn't love. Because true love doesn't betray, deceive, or diminish. Love doesn't need a lame excuse, a hidden cell phone, or an unannounced disappearance. Love doesn't need a strategy to be fair. I spent too long thinking it was my fault, that perhaps I had become less interesting, less desirable, less fun. But today, with all the serenity that only emotional distance can provide, I see that the fault was never mine. I was under the illusion that the other person was what I projected, not who they really were. And we have this cruel habit, don't we, of dressing people up as what we wish they were. And when the mask falls, The shock isn't just with the truth, it's with the fantasy we've created for ourselves. His betrayal made me bleed in silence, but it also woke me up. It made me look at myself more truthfully. It made me see where my limits were, where I left the door open to being emotionally invaded. And no, I didn't deserve that. No woman deserves that. No human being deserves it. But I'm not an eternal victim of this story either, because in the end, I was the one who decided what to do with the pain. And transforming pain into wisdom is perhaps one of the most revolutionary ways to exist. I know that many people, when going through this, think about screaming, exposing, confronting, throwing everything out there. And look, I understand. The urge really comes. But sometimes, silence is also a strategic choice. The silence that isn't omission, but self-control. That isn't fear, but discernment. And it was this silence that saved me from sinking into a game of resentment and noisy revenge. Because the real payback for those who betray is losing access to what they never knew they valued. I still remember the day when, for the first time after everything, I looked in the mirror and didn't feel sorry for myself. I didn't feel shame or sadness. I felt respect, because only those who go through an earthquake like this and remain standing know the value of keeping your head up even when the world seems to want to see you crumble. This was one of the greatest internal transformations I've experienced. I changed the questions why to what now. I exchanged waiting for explanations for decisions, and that changes everything. We spend our entire lives hearing that we need to forgive to move forward. And I agree, but with one caveat: before forgiving others, we need to forgive ourselves. Forgive ourselves for loving someone who hurt us, for trusting too much, for ignoring the signs. Because only after this inward forgiveness can we walk with ease. I no longer carry resentment. I don't need to. Let him carry what he did. I carry what I've learned. And you know what I've learned most valuable? That when someone you love betrays you, it's because they never deserved you. This phrase sums up everything that remains after the storm. And I don't say this with bitterness. I say it with peace, with clarity. Because true love requires merit. It requires presence. It requires truth. And if that's missing, everything is missing. Today, as I share this story, I don't want anyone to see me as a victim or a warrior. I want them to see me as real, as someone who fell and rose with greater awareness, who understood that pain is part of the journey, but it doesn't have to be the final destination, that loving another can never come at the cost of yourself, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is the one we choose to give ourselves. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is something in this story that I haven't told yet, and maybe it's exactly what will make you recognize yourself completely. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's something few people talk about when it comes to betrayal, the silence after the explosion. When everything has come to light, when the emotional dust begins to settle, what's left is an empty space, a heavy silence, but also full of possibilities. It's in this space that we find ourselves again, or at least we try to. I spent days staring at the ceiling, wondering how I could have trusted so much. How could someone who shared my pillow, my plans, and even my passwords carry such dissimulation in their eyes? But as painful as this realization was, it was also liberating. Because in that silence, I began to hear my own voice again. A voice that, for so long, had been muffled by attempts to please, to give in, to not bother too much. Have you ever felt this too? This slow, almost imperceptible fading, but that one day becomes an absence of self? The pain of betrayal was real, but what healed me wasn't making him feel firsthand what made me live. It was choosing myself back. It was looking in the mirror and seeing not the betrayed woman, but the woman who survived her own pain without losing the ability to love, not loving the other, loving yourself, respecting your own story, your choices, even the wrong ones, because even mistakes reveal who we are. And I refuse to let this story end as a tale of heartache, because even amidst the tears, there was beauty, there was strength, there was courage. I'm proud of not having let my heart sour, of having rebuilt my peace with firm hands, but also with lightness. I didn't need to raise my voice or carry a shield. It was enough to know who I was. And that awareness, when it arrives, changes everything. If this story touched you in any way, leave a comment below. I've felt that too. Your comment helps us maintain this space for real stories and voices that deserve to be heard. Oh, and if you want to hear more stories like this, like and subscribe to the channel. There's a video right here that will touch you too. Now listen to me carefully. What follows is a part of this journey that I have never told anyone about, and that perhaps reveals the most intimate truth of everything I have experienced. And if you've stayed with me this far, it's because somehow this story also spoke to something inside you. So take advantage of this space. Leave it in the comments. I'm with you until the end. It may seem simple, but this exchange strengthens us more than you can imagine. If you felt a connection, if this kind of conversation makes you feel good, subscribe to the channel. That's what keeps this place alive, full of stories that deserve to be heard calmly, respectfully, and truthfully. Oh, and leave a like too, because that's what shows YouTube that there are people who want this kind of real, intimate, and truly moving content. There's a video right here that complements everything we talked about today. Click and stay with me there. The next story might surprise you even more.